Hi all, thanks for coming today and joining the presentation on harnessing the power of Creo Industrial Design. Today we will be taking a look at Interactive Surface Design, or ISDX. Okay, so let's take a look at the topics today. So we'll take a look at, briefly what is Creo Freestyle, which we talked about before. I'll briefly touch on DEX a little bit, but this is primarily going to be on ISDX. Okay, so there's a picture there of my son and I to the left. I have a background in ID. I've been at PDSVISION for 3 years, but I've been in an AE role for about 6 years total. So here's a car that I created with Creo Freestyle. So I wanted to kind of show this because the topic today on ISDX is not only about creating curves and surfaces, but also utilizing the Freestyle mesh to create those curves. So this is a car that I created. Freestyle is a very cool tool. You can basically sculpt, you can push and pull and model like you would kind of sculpt with clay. Okay. This is another Freestyle model that I created, which is this fighter jet you can see here. So some of the benefits is that you can increase your time to market when using Freestyle, and that's because of how quickly you can model a product. So you can see this jet right here. This basically took me maybe total sculpting time, maybe a few hours or so. And of course, you have to kind of get the general shape, then you got to go back in there and tweak it more. So it does take some time, but the more fluent you get in it, the more familiar you are with using the tool. It can really speed up the time it takes to get from an idea to a concept, right? I think that it also really increases the aesthetic of your products because you have such freedom. When you're creating a model with curves and surfaces, it's very technical. So you have to focus on making sure that your curves and surfaces are very clean, that you have good continuity between the curves and surfaces. So with Freestyle, when you're sculpting in that environment, it's always trying to maintain that curvature continuity for you. So you can just kind of play and have fun. And then from that fun, you guys know, is the birth of great ideas and aesthetics. Okay. All right. So ISDX. So ISDX is a surfacing tool within Creo that is very good for people that are both engineers and have a more artistic background. So it actually is the only feature within Creo that I know of that gives you this 4-view layout that you can see in the bottom left of your screen. And that's really important because what's nice about ISDX is as you're tweaking the curves, modifying the control points along the curves in ISDX, the surface is going to update live. So you're going to see the impacts of your adjustments to the curves in real time right after you make those changes. Okay. And what's also nice is that you can still have some level of parametric control. So for example, in the ISDX of the jet that I'm going to show you, I actually have like a little skeleton that I created, which is I have a sketch of the profile of the jet. I have some datum points and planes that allow me to create a planar curve to make sure that my curve's straight. And then later on, because I have that skeleton, I can adjust those things to make sure that curves and surfaces are where I need them to be. Okay. And what's also great too is that, I'm literally going to show how you can actually create curves referencing the Freestyle mesh. So in that bottom right image, that light blue model that you see is the Freestyle model of the jet, and that orange curve has points snapped to that mesh. So if you take a look at those circles along the curve, those circles are points along that curve. They're snapped to the surface of that Freestyle mesh. So that's powerful because that helps make sure that you're getting the curvature that you originally wanted when you created that mesh. And what's nice is you can also break that link. You can break that association. So if you're like, hey, you know what? It's nice that we have this model here as a reference, but I really need to adjust that curve, talk to my team, management, whoever, and they said that, we can't use that surface as it was created in Freestyle. You can say, hey, let's unlink this point along the curve from the mesh. Let's unlink it from the mesh so that way we can move it wherever we want. Okay. And also that's great too if you want to just blow away the model in the end. So say you're like, hey, we don't need this Freestyle mesh anymore. Let's just delete it from the model tree. If you unlink all those points along the curve from the mesh, you can do that. Okay. All right. So let's go into Creo now and get started. All right, so let's take a look at this Freestyle jet that I created. There's also this design exploration tree here to the left. So you can see that this tree basically has these different checkpoints. So this is a great way for you to save iterations of your model. And it doesn't just have to be a Freestyle model or an ISDX model. It could just be a typical part that you create in Creo, but it saves different checkpoints in your part file so that you don't have to do a save as, save a copy or whatever. You could just come back in here and say, hey, I want to go back to checkpoint 10. You can activate it. It's going to take you back in time to that checkpoint, right? So let's go back to the latest checkpoint here. Okay, great. I'm going to hide these datum planes. All right, so there's the Freestyle feature in the model tree right here. And also notice that to create that feature, you have to go to the ribbon in the surfaces group, and right below the style feature, which is the ISDX feature, is Freestyle. And this actually comes with the base package of Creo. So if you're interested in, training around that, please let us know. We can do some training for you. So there's the Freestyle feature. I'll edit that. Okay, and you can see that we have a bunch of points here along the mesh. To start with, you would basically go to the shapes group and bring in a primitive shape, like a sphere, for example. Then you begin to sculpt that. I can go in here and make changes if I want. I can grab that vertice, I can grab that edge or face, then pull that out and adjust that. So I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this so that if you're not keen to freestyle, you can take a look at it and kind of get a gist of what that is. All right, so let's cancel that. Okay, great. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to use this Freestyle geometry in a skeleton within an assembly. So I wanted to publish that geometry out. So if you look at the footer in the model tree here, there's the published geometry ID 355.3.1. And basically what I did to create that was I went to the model intent group, published geometry, and there's a surface sets collector, which allows me to basically grab the whole quilt or just specific surfaces. So there's the quilt selector right there. I can grab the whole thing, and that's what I did to create that published geometry. All right. Let's also take a look at the assembly. All right. So the idea here for me is that I wanted to create a skeleton part and create geometry so that I can push that geometry to the different components of the jet potentially, right? So if you look up here at the top, we have the aircraft skeleton. I can activate that. I'm not going to do it here because it's open in another window of Creo, but below that, I have my different components here. So I have the fuselage, engine bay, the canopy, the wings, vertical stabilizers, and right now my Freestyle mesh is hidden, but it's shown right there. So the idea is that we create this skeleton part with surfaces for each one of these components, right? And then just like we copied the Freestyle mesh into the skeleton, we would then copy the surfaces into these individual parts and then work on them from there, right? We can create a thicken to solidify them. make any adjustments that would need to be made for each component. But, you know, the idea is to start off with a skeleton model with the surfaces of every one of these components and then share them here so that people are working in the right space claims, they have the right data, and we're following that top-down design philosophy. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the skeleton part right here. Okay, so you can see that we have the original Freestyle mesh here in light blue, and I use the copy geometry feature, right? So within the skeleton part, I went to copy geometry, I browse for that part with the mesh, then I brought that in. And that's exactly what this external copy geometry is. So if I go up there and edit that, we can see that I brought that here into session, and I selected the published geometry feature from the footer, and it added it to the published geometry collector here, okay? So once I have that mesh within my skeleton part, I can then start creating my curves, right, from that mesh, okay? So let's expand this group here, and we see that we have our profile sketch right there. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so this is one spline. I wanted to make sure that I had, one continuous spline, just that my curves and surface would be clean when creating them. And I can always go back here and modify this, right? So for example, if I want to bump up the surfaces, I can go in here, grab that point, drag it up, down, left or right. So after I actually create the surfaces with an ISDX, I can always come back here and adjust those two with these points. That's pretty powerful. Okay. I also have these cross-section positions. So this is a data point feature that I placed along the top portion of that spline curve in that sketch. So I have points laid out along the curve. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to create datum planes that I can use as a reference for sketching. Because if you don't sketch on a datum plane, the points along your curve may not be in the right plane, and you don't get as clean of a surface when your points aren't aligned and they're not straight. Okay, so there's that, and then there's my planes, right? So I have my planes then created along those points on the curve parallel to my front plane. All right, and then I have a sketch back here as well that I could potentially use to do a trim. Then I have my first style feature. Then I also have this canopy where I've got this extrude here to trim out that canopy. So that's my profile. And then I also have this extrude back here to create that cutout that I'm going to need later. Okay, so basically, in the skeleton part, I'm doing some planning, right? I'm just not going in there and saying, hey, now let's go ahead and create some surfaces. I'm thinking about, okay, well, what's a good way for me to think about creating these surfaces so that the quality is good, and that if I have to make changes later on, it won't be so hard to do that. That's the point of this. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the first style feature here, the only style feature right now. Edit definition there. Okay, great. So right now we're seeing an overlay of the original Freestyle mesh in blue, and also the surfaces that I created in ISDX here in gray. So what I'm going to do for the time being is I'm going to hide the gray. So I'm just going to see now, right, these surfaces from the Freestyle mesh, okay? All right, but I do want to see certain planes here though, so I'm going to need to make sure that I have my planes shown, okay? So I'm going to use, a curve in here, and let me make sure that I have the right one. So I'm going to use that datum 5. Okay, so what's nice is I can actually set the active plane with an ISDX. So the active plane is the plane that you're going to sketch your curves on. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to right click, set active plane, and then choose the datum 5 plane. That's the plane that I'm going to choose to sketch on. All right, and you'll notice that we get a little grid on that plane showing us that that is the set active plane. Okay, so now that I have that set, I'm going to hide what I had previously created, and I'm going to start to create my first planar curve, right? So I actually don't really want to see that grid on the plane. For me, it's kind of, for whatever reason, it feels like it's always in the way visually. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that by going into preferences and then deselecting this grid checkbox. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and create my first curve. All right. And I'm going to select planar curve, right? And that's going to ensure that the curve that I create is going to be, on the plane. All right. Now I'm also going to need to see this blue curve, that profile curve that I sketched. And to snap to that curve, I have to hold Shift. We'll hold down Shift, left click, and then snap. All right. And then same thing, I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard. And if I do that, you can see I can snap to the geometry, right, of my Freestyle mesh. Okay, so I got that there, and I'm also going to flip to that bottom side, and I'm going to grab that surface, and then I'm also going to grab that sketch again. Okay. Now, once I have that, I have to make some changes to my curve. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click and select Edit Definition. And then from here, what I can do is I can select the endpoints of my curve, and I can adjust the tangency there. So I'm going to right click that handle and say, let's make this normal to the right plane, for example. And then same thing up here. I'm going to grab that endpoint and make that normal to my right plane. And that's because when I mirror this surface eventually, I want to make sure that I don't get a seam between the two halves of my mirror. I want a nice smooth transition between the two. So that's why I'm making that normal condition there. Okay. So I've got that placed on the curve. So I'm going to hide my datum planes right now and my points. And these little circles along the curve mean that we're snapped to points along that mesh. But let's take a look down here. You can see if I go into my front plane that we start up here and it kind of dips down here to the right. We don't want that condition. And the reason why we're getting that is this point along the surface. If I add another point here, I can right click and say add point, and I could bump that up, and that kind of solves that too. Or I can just move the point that's on the surface like this and say, let's unlink from that surface. So let's break the association, that parent-child relationship between the surface and the point. And then once I do that with the point, I can move it, and it's no longer linked to that surface. All right, so that's fine for now. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have here. I think I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out a little bit and up potentially, like that. Okay, good. So now I'm gonna go ahead and click OK. So there's the curve on the surface of that mesh. And now I'm going to hide that freestyle geometry, all right, and start to work in here. So I've got what I need now. I am going to create some more curves though. So to control the detail of the surface that I'm going to create, I'm going to add more geometry here. So for one, I'm going to come up here, right click, go to curve, and this time I'm going to create a free curve because I'm no longer going to sketch on that datum 5 plane. So I'll select free curve, and to snap to the edge of the surface to the left, and I'll hold Shift again, and snap there, right? And then shift and snap here, and then edit definition. But I also want to add a midpoint because I want to utilize this curve and this curve. In order to do that, when creating my surface, I need to snap this new curve that I'm creating to that previous curve. So let's right click, add a midpoint point there, and then shift snap to that curve. That's good. And then here on the ends of my curve, I can also do a surface curvature tangency, right? So now this curve is curvature continuous with that surface here. Same thing here, right click, and we're good. All right, let's create another curve down here as well. And we'll go from here to that curve to this side. Just that tangency there and there as well. Okay, and I think I'm gonna go in here and add just one more curve. We have this internal edge here in black that we can see. So I wanna make sure that I'm capturing that to make sure that my surface is good quality. So I'm gonna go ahead and right click here, create a curve. And I'm gonna grab that edge, and then come in there and just, I'm gonna slide these over until it snaps to the perpendicular edge. And I'm gonna change my tangency to curvature on both sides, like that. Okay, so I think that I've got a good quality network of curves to use. What I might do though is just kind of straighten this out down here. Let me go back into this curve, and I wanna pull this down like that. Oh, look at the opposite way. We pull it down here. And then here. I can adjust the length of those tangency handles. I can also do that up here in the tangent tab. I can give it a specific length. Okay, all right, that looks pretty good. Maybe I'll drop it down a little bit. And I don't want to spend too much time boring you guys with these little things, but just want to make sure that the surface is okay. So I think we'll be okay there. Let's find it in between. Look at that. Okay, so now I can go in here and start creating my surface. So I'm going to find my surface up here in the dashboard, or I can right click and go to surface here from the menu. And I have some curves hidden, and the reason is, in order for me to get the curvature continuity between the new surface that I'm creating and the surface on the left and right in gray, is I want to make sure I'm grabbing the edges of the surface, right, and not the curves that I created. So I'm going to grab this top curve here and then grab this edge, and get the whole shift just like you would with the boundary blends in order to get the whole line chain. And notice that with ISDX, it's different than how you would create a surface in the boundary blend. In the boundary blend, you have to define your first direction curves and then your second direction curves. In ISDX, you define the boundary of the surface, and then the curves that are inside become your internal curves that define the shape more. So let's go ahead and get the boundary curves. These four here. I can easily trim this too. I can say, hey, let's trim this curve here at that spot using that line as a reference. Trim at, and I like to just kind of make sure I'm keeping this stuff clean. And I can even go back here if I want to, right, select chain one, do the same thing here. I'll trim at that edge, and then trim here as well. Okay, so I've got 3 curves selected. I'm going to need this 4th one. Hold Control, then hold Shift to get the rest of that edge. Okay, so now we have our surface, right? But we've just specified the boundary edges, right? So now in order to define the shape more, we're going to use these internal curves that we created. So let's go ahead and right click and choose the internal collector, which is also up here. There's the internal chain collector. Now hold Control and grab this curve. This next one, I'm going to kind of just go down the line. All right, and then this curve right here. Okay, so there's an issue with this curve. It's not allowing us to collect it, and the reason is because more points need to be snapped. So we have these horizontal curves created. So we have to snap those to this line in order for us to use it in the surface. So all we have to do now is just find the one that wasn't snapped to it. So there's that one, there's this one. Oh, that one's not snapped to it. All right. So let me do this first. Cancel. Regenerate. Okay, so it's this one, right? So one of these curves or one of these points along that surface needs to be snapped to that curve. So I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to unlink it. Then once I unlink it, I can then snap it to this curve. Let's just make sure. Yep. Okay, good. Okay, and you kind of have to do that. You just have to check your curves once in a while. It's easy to forget to, and then same thing down here with a right click at a midpoint, and then snap that as well, right there. Okay, good. Then this curve down here. Okay, so let's go back into that surface. Let's edit it. And now, because we fixed that problem, we can add that curve as well. All right. Now, what I'm going to do here is I have to make sure that my continuity is where I need it. So right now we have a tangency between the orange surface and the gray on both sides. I want that to be a curvature continuous. So I'll go ahead and select that by right clicking on the tangency handle. Then same here. And I also want to make sure that I change this from tangent to normal. If you don't see normal here in the right click menu, just change back to position. And then once you do that and you right click again, you can then turn it back to normal, okay? And we're gonna do that at the top of that curve and at the bottom. And remember, the reason why we could change these to normal is because we specified a normal condition at the endpoints of this curve here in green that you see. Without that, we don't have the ability to change this to normal. Okay, good. Now, there's also this nice tool in here called reparameterization up in the dashboard. And if I select that, what's nice about this is this allows me to see the flow of my UV lines of my surface. So I don't always want to just assume that the surface that I created is, as good as it can get, right? So you can see that this shows a, pretty nice flow across from the gray into the orange. There, that looks pretty good. Then we get down here. Now down here is where I see, you know, some problems here. So that's due in part, you know, to the curve that I created here in white. So I can adjust that to kind of fix it and resolve some problems. We can also use these reparameterization curves to fix some of that. So if I right click down here and say add reparam curve, okay, you can see that I now have the option to adjust these UV curves. If I grab that left side of that and pull that up, you'll see the UV lines of my surface update, right? That just changed. It's a little better, right? Okay, and I can also do it in the other direction. So there's the U direction, we have the V direction. So I'm gonna come down here and then right click, add curve. And I'm gonna go into my right orientation. And I'm gonna go ahead and try to line these up a little better. That looks better on that side. Now add a new curve here. So this is something I wanted to show you guys just because it gives you another level of tweaking that you can do to your surface to improve the quality here. So let's go ahead and drag this guy over here, straighten that out. And there is a lag here, I apologize. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but just wanted you to show that that is there and it is available if you want to go ahead and, you know, tweak your curves more. And it looks like I got rid of one of the horizontal ones on accident. So let's just add that in real quickly and then we'll switch back to the rest of the demo. Okay. All right. And then like I said, if I wanted to improve the quality, you know, I can always go back into here, find this curve, you know, start to tweak it. I might pull that in a little bit like that. That looks better. Okay. All right. So I've got that. Good. Let's take a look at the surface. There's also the ability to do an analysis to look at the continuity between the surfaces. So if I want to ensure that I really have that curvature continuity between the blue and the gray surfaces, I can always select the surfaces, for example, or just go straight to reflection. I think I'm going to use this analysis and then grab the surfaces in ISDX here. Okay, so let's change this angle here to one that makes more sense for what we're trying to compare. And you can see if we zoom in here, we have a nice transition of the zebra stripes from one surface to the next. So that gives us a pretty good indication that the surface that we create is pretty good quality. All right. You could also go in wireframe, take a look at the flow of curves. So there's that. Okay. Now let's focus our eyes to the tip of this area of the jet towards the front here, the nose. So there's a couple ways to cap this off. There's one interesting way. It's kind of like a little cheat that's done through ISDX. So let's go ahead and create a surface here. And I'm going to grab these 3 boundary curves. So I got one, I got another one, and this one. Okay, now let me just trim this real quick here. All right, so this is the least favorable condition. So if I go in here and I select normal, and I change this to curvature continuous, right there, there's curvature, right? If I actually take a look at this and I go into the reparameterization feature, we can see that, this line basically converges, into this point down here, right? That's not really the, best condition. So what's really good is that there's a little cheat here called, let me just actually get out of that mode, use 3 and 4 boundary. So it's basically going to cheat and say, hey, we're going to create a 3 boundary surface as if it was a 4. So what that's going to do is it's going to give you a better quality surface. So if I select that checkbox, okay, here, go to curvature, and let's just select offset, for example, right? Now, not all the lines are converging into this point. They're kind of going across this direction at an angle and across that direction. So, this would give us a better condition. And, once we did an analysis, we wouldn't see like a little weird spot down here in the corner that's somewhat deformed because we have a bunch of these lines converging into this one corner, right? So basically, that's a nice cheat that ISDX allows you to do. If that wasn't available, how would I approach that? So let's look at that. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that surface, or you know what? I'm just gonna, let me go ahead and delete it. So one option that's really nice too about ISDX is you can actually create curves on a surface. So you don't always have to project the curve on the surface. You can just create a curve on the surface. So I'm gonna right click and select curve. And then I have the curve on surface option. And I'm gonna hold shift. I'm gonna snap to this point. I'm gonna create a point there and create that curve. And I'll create another one from there to there. Okay, so what's nice about this is, I have to fix that, right? Okay, so what's nice about this is this will allow me to trim out this gray surface with these 2 curve on surface curves that I created so that I can create a new 4 boundary curve surface. So I'm gonna select this gray surface, okay? And then I'm gonna choose surface trim. And you can see that we have our quilt selected already. So now we need to grab our curve collector, and I'll select this curve and that curve, okay? And once I do that, then I could just go to my delete collector, grab the surface I want to remove, complete the operation, okay? So what this essentially did was this allowed me, those curves on surfaces allowed me to create this 4 boundary right here that I can use to create a new surface. I can grab that surface, that second one, the third, and the fourth. Okay, and then I can come in here and say curvature there, and then curvature there. Okay, so that's pretty powerful. right? The fact that you can just basically draw on top of the surface, you know, and then trim it out, create that surface, okay? And then again, you know, I can always go back into here, reparameterization, take a look at it. You can see it's a pretty clean surface there. Then what I would do essentially is just come down here and do the same thing, right? So in this case though, I may have to project one because I have this edge here, so it won't, my curve on surface won't go from here across both this and this surface. So what I have to do is I'll create one curve on surface like this. Let me modify this a bit to straighten that out. Then I'll create a second one, but this will be a free curve. So I'm gonna do a free curve from here to here, like that. Now the catch is though, it's not on the surface, so I have to project it, right? So what I'll do is I'll go to drop curve. So you can also project curves on surfaces within ISDX. And I'll grab that surface and I'll say project on this surface and this surface. But you can see I'm using the wrong plane. I'm using that datum 5 plane. I want to project using the right plane as my direction plane, like that. So now that's a nice curve that I can use. And I'll click OK, or just click the middle mouse button to complete. And then same thing, I can just, you know, go back in here and trim this out. So there's a surface to trim. There's my curve collector, and I'll select these curves here. And then I'll choose the surfaces to remove. Okay, so now I have that 4 boundary again, which will allow me to go back in here and I'm going to hold shift to get that second boundary chain, then control the third and the last one here. Okay, then from here again, I'll go ahead and adjust the condition here. So I'll just use the curvature there, and then here as well. All right, and then down here as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is that I think that I have a pretty good start. You know, I may have to go back in here and change some things, modify some things, but it's clean for now. Let's exit the style feature. Okay, regenerating. Okay, so from here, what I want to do is, let me actually show the canopy profile for the intersection there. Okay, so now let's take the quilt. Let's make sure that we merge these together. Okay, then I'll mirror these over the right plane. Merge. And then I also want to create my trimming curve. So let's go ahead and go to trim, and I'll create my trim curve with that surface, that extruded quilt here. Oh, I want the intersection curve, sorry. Let me remove that. Okay, intersection curve, I'm gonna use my quilts. So there's that quilt, there's that quilt. Now I have that. I'm going to hide my extrude here. And then I'm going to trim now. I'm going to trim that quilt using this curve. And I'm going to keep both sides of my mesh. So I'll flip my direction to keep both sides. Like that. And then just so it's easy to see, let me change the appearance quickly here. Is the right one? Yeah, okay, great. So let's grab that whole quilt, give an appearance, and then same thing with this quilt here. Okay, great. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is, let me also take a look at this guy, and I'm gonna actually trim this, but what I might wanna do is create another merge here. Let me take a look, rear trim. Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to grab the fill tool, and I'm gonna select the rear trim plane that I have there. And I'm gonna flip my sketch setup, and I'm gonna create my surface. All right, and then let's also merge those surfaces. So I'm gonna grab this one and this one and do a merge operation like that. That looks pretty good. Okay, great. Then I'll add the appearance real quick to that back surface like that. Okay, so now that I have that, okay, what I want to do is I also want to create a merge feature that's going to trim out the back portion of the jet. So let's go ahead and do a merge. We'll grab that quilt, this quilt, and just make sure that I have what I need. That looks pretty good. Click OK, and there it is, right? So now I'm going to turn on my copy geom feature of the original Freestyle mesh and compare it, right? And I got my cutout, right? If I come back here and look at it, that looks pretty good. All right, then I'm going to hide this. Okay, nice. Now, what I could always do is, I can go back into my sketch, and change some things. So for example, I can go back to my profile sketch and say, hey, you know what? I think I should, bump this area down a little bit. So let's take that spline, double click it, and then take some points. Maybe I'll have more of a smooth transition from there to there. Maybe I drop this down just a little bit, just a hair, and this down just a little bit. Click OK, complete my sketch. And let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see that it took those changes pretty seamlessly, right? There aren't any features that blew up. They're showing red in the model tree, so I don't have to go back in there and resolve any failures. Now that doesn't mean that if I change something else that I won't have to do that. Of course, Creo isn't perfect, it's powerful, but there are times when you make an adjustment and you have to go back in there and make a change to the features to redefine them and clean things up, right? Now, what's also important to note is, say I don't want any association between the external copy geometry feature and the actual freestyle feature in the freestyle part. I can say, hey, you know what, let's make sure that we break the actual, parent-child dependency so that if that original freestyle mesh is updated, it won't affect the curves that we created. You can always just go to no dependency, select that, and then click OK. So that way we don't have to worry about that problem coming up in the future, right? And again, if you want to blow away the freestyle mesh in this skeleton, you can always go back into the curves and just unlink the points of the curve on the mesh, right? So now let's take a look at this. Let's switch back to the assembly here. So there's the assembly. So, let's just say, for example, that, somebody needs, part of the canopy or something like, just this hatch here. So I can select the canopy part, for example. I can activate it, right? Go here to copy geometry, and I can basically, deselect that geometry there and find the quilt and copy that in, right? Then once I have that, I can open up that canopy part and start to work on it, right? I can trim it further. I can resurface some stuff. I can remove areas of the surface and add a surface. Whatever tweaking has to be done, I can do that. Maybe this is just a space claim, and they take this and they create their own surfaces from this. I don't know. There's a lot that you can do, but now you actually have this geometry in that canopy part. If I want to go ahead and thicken it, I can select it. This is too big, but let's do, I don't know, let's do, wait. Just take a look at that, and then maybe go towards the inside. So there's my thicken, right? So now I have a solid. From that, I can always go back to my assembly. Again, I can share this into the fuselage part, for example. I know that these would typically be assemblies, right? You wouldn't just have one part for all of this stuff, but I just wanted to have a simple, clean way for you to see how you can share geometry from the skeleton with the surfaces, to parts and assemblies. Okay, so that's it for me today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned more about surfacing and Freestyle and ISDX as well. If you have questions, you want to contact me at my email. My email is shown there. There's a sales email, and we also have a PDSVISION YouTube channel with lots of great content as well. I'll take some time right now. I'm not sure if you guys have any questions. There's one. Okay, yeah. So somebody said didn't know that we were going to talk about freestyle, was hoping for it. Yeah, so I think that this was earlier in the call. Yeah, so we primarily 99% of what I showed was ISDX, and we just touched upon freestyle briefly. Any more questions? I'll give you guys some time to ask questions. Nope. Okay. Well, thanks for joining. Look forward to the webinars that we have every Wednesday, and hope to hear from you guys. Thanks.